This season, Instacart has your back to school. As in, they've got your back to school lunch favorites, like snack packs and fresh fruit. And they've got your back to school supplies, like backpacks, binders, and pencils. And they've got your back when your kid casually tells you they have a huge school project due tomorrow. Let's face it, we were all that kid. So first call your parents to say I'm sorry, and then download the Instacart app to get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes all school year long. Get a $0 delivery fee for your first 3 orders while supplies last. Minimum $10 per order. Additional terms apply.
Have you ever covered a carpet stain with a rug? Ignored a leaky faucet? Pretended your half-painted living room is supposed to look like that? Well, you're not alone. We've all got unfinished home projects. But there's an easier way. Thumbtack is the app that makes it easier to care for your home. Pull out your phone and in just a few taps, search, chat, and book highly rated pros right in your neighborhood. Download Thumbtack and start caring for your home the easier way.
Better way, better way. Hey, better way, better way. Better way, better way. Hey, what will you choose today? Hey. Welcome to our podcast, A Better Way Road. What choice will you make? What road will you take? I'm your very grateful host, Telda. I believe that there's a crisis of crime due in part to a crisis of choice. We come together on a better way road to help in navigating the journey of choice making in a judgment-free lane. We're sharing the stories of people who are finding a better way. Now, we're not experts. Any advice or opinions are solely the pathways of our guests. So buckle up, pack some snacks, and let's begin our trip up a better way road. And talk it out together about a better way, better way. Better way, better way. Better way, better way. I'm so proud of you, 'cause you choose a better way. All right, it is my honor to introduce you to the Honorable Judge Carr L. Darden. I'm so happy to have you here today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me.
Well, I appreciate it. And I'm happy. And I want to tell you that the reason that we're here, the title of our show today is, What Do I Need to Do to Not See You? Now, I don't mean you, the person. I mean, what do we need to do not to be seen by a judge on the wrong side of the law? So I will kind of play with that and have some fun with that. But I'm glad you're here, but I really don't want to see you.
I can understand that.
Absolutely. So what I will do is I'm going to just start off with just a few accolades, well-earned credentials that you have. And trust me when I tell you that I could go on and on. If you ever want to Google Judge Darden, you will find just a plethora of a well decided upon and well executed decisions in his life that have earned him these honors. But I will begin with you retired as a appellate judge from the Indiana Court of Appeals back in July of 2012. And that was that you were the senior judge in the Indiana Supreme Court. And you were also the recipient of not one, not two, but 3 Sagamore on the Wabash. And that is Indiana's highest Distinguished Citizens Award. You were also awarded by your peers the Excellently Qualified Award. And I see that you made note that one meant particularly a lot to you because it was came from your peers. You were honorably discharged from the Air Force, so I do want to thank you so much for your service. You continue to serve on several charitable boards. You're a lifelong NAACP member, various boards nationally, Bar Association, and locally. Also, I want to point out that you and your lovely wife established the Judge Carr L. Darden and Mrs. Lundy Darden Public Sector Legal Educational Scholarship Fund, and that was established at the Indiana University Robert H. McKinney School of Law. So I have the pleasure of knowing you also as a very faithful man of God, married, I want to say 67 years, make sure I have that right, and a very dedicated father. So as I said, I could go on and on, But I just need you to know, with all that goodness, I really just don't want to see you.
Right. I understand.
Certainly. But I do want to open up the floor to you, and I'd love for you to just talk with us a little bit about your very early years. I did just a little bit of research, and something that just stuck out to me was even at an early age, I mean 8, 9 years old, you began to ask questions. You sit with your mother, and of course, a wonderful woman made space and time to listen and to have conversations with you. So tell me a little bit more about that.
I had 2 older brothers who served in World War II, and they both served in the European theater. My mom started to read to me when I was very, very young, perhaps around 2 years old. So I was always interested in things that she read to me, stories, books, things of that nature. And I think what happened is I took a lot of that I learned and read about. I took it at heart. And I believed what I was reading, what I learned in school. And I always felt that the laws, the Constitution, was to protect all of us. Now, why I came to that decision at a very young age, I really don't know, except for the fact that that was what she instilled in me when I was very young. Mm-hmm. And as a result, it carried over as I got older. Now, when my brothers returned from the European theater in World War II, I was reared in Nashville, Tennessee. So it was very concerning to me as to why this country, America, could go to Europe, go to the Pacific, fight for what we consider to be freedom, democracy. And yet, when my brothers returned home, living in Nashville, they had to ride on the back of the bus. Mm-hmm. We had a racial society where there were certain norms, perhaps even laws, where Black people at that time could not go. So it was always a question in the back of my mind, why? If the Constitution said that we were all to be treated equally, I couldn't understand why the difference. And especially considering people whom we thought were our enemies at the time that we fought in Europe, yet they could come to America, could live, ride on the back of the bus, do anything they wanted to, but Black people could not. So it always bothered me. And my mom used to say things like, son, just continue to study, work hard, and someday it will become clearer to you as you get older. I took that at heart, and I think that that inspired me, but yet in the same manner, I was conflicted because I couldn't understand the distinction. Mm. I knew we were a different race, color, creed, and so forth, but the fact remains, what did that have to do with the distinction that the Constitution, I thought, provided for everyone, that we were all to be treated equally under the law.
Wow. And again, I know that it was such a young age that you took that to your heart, and that began to really set the tone, kind of began to mold your thinking. Another thing that your mom said to you, I'm sure your family encouraged you, you said to get your education, that's your way out, and be in a position to make changes step by step.
That is true.
Absolutely. And so again, just, having the platform in which you could ask those questions, you could wonder, you could be told, what was and was not, and that you were even as a child, you were taken seriously about those things. So we move on to fast forward. You decided on a career in law, and at that time I understand you drove from Indianapolis to Indiana University, Bloomington, and back, like round trip, several times a week for several years. So and I believe you had a young family that time. So what drove that level of determination, rain, sleet, snow, Indiana weather, to make sure that happened?
The only thing that I can think of is that I wanted to be successful no matter what I was involved in. And my mother instilled in me at a very early age that you could accomplish anything that you wanted to if you worked hard and you applied yourself. Mm-hmm. I realized that she was saying those things even though we lived in a segregated society, but it was enough to make me believe, and it set goals for me that I wanted to attain. And I know that sounds a little strange, but at a very young age, that's the way I was thinking. And so I got married early, young. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I would not advise other people to get married as young as my wife and I were when we got married.
But 67 years later.
Oh, yeah. But I felt that living in Nashville at the time, I really didn't have any money per se, so I thought joining the military might be an option for me. Mm. So I joined the military, and I think it was one of the best things that ever happened to me in my life, because we left Nashville and we lived in California. Mm. And to me, it was a different lifestyle, a different way of living in every aspect. The fact that I didn't have to ride on the back of the bus, the fact that I felt free to go wherever I wanted to go. And I'm sure there was racism even in California. But fortunately, I was in the military, and I was in a city or town that was made up of a lot of military people. Mm-hmm. So we were not exposed to the racism, I'm sure, that other people might have been exposed to in the state of California. Hmm. So as a result, when I got discharged from the military, I could not perceive of me going back to Nashville, being required to ride on the back of the bus again, after being in the military, being taught how to use a weapon to defend myself in other aspects of life. Mm-hmm. It just was not for me. So my father lived here in Indiana. Mm-hmm. I had an older brother, aunts, uncles, cousins, and so forth here. So I thought the better place for my wife and my family was to come to Indiana. And I think that was another great decision that we made at a very young age. So I often tell people that I am a Hoosier by choice.
I like that.
Yeah, I wasn't born here and so forth, but this is my home. And I appreciate all the things that this state has done for me, this community. And I would like to think that I have, in return, contributed back to the state and this community.
Without a doubt.
Because I was welcomed here. And even there have been some situations that occurred in Indianapolis that were not pleasant, but I thought I had a platform that I could fight segregation better from Indiana than I could from Nashville, Tennessee at the time.
Absolutely. And it's one of the things, there are many things I admire of you and your family, but you said, until your dying day, you will fight to eradicate injustice. Even retired and beyond, that's something that you have just caught hold of and just stayed committed to, throughout. So, again, I just think that a lifelong
ambition and goal that still, still lives and flourishes. So, and the Air Force, you also said you got to travel the world. That was an opportunity. So you linked your formal education with the military education and then on to law school. So just a plethora of experiences before you, began a full-time career. So I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, I was fortunate in the Air Force. I was what is called an aircraft loadmaster, globemaster, and it gave me an opportunity to fly into different countries, Japan, Korea, Philippines, England, Scotland, the Azores. As a poor kid from Tennessee, I never would have had those opportunities.
Wow.
And being able to go to other countries and see how people live there, it gave me a greater appreciation for America. Now, I often use this phrase, and I'm sure other people feel just as patriotic about their country as I do. But I often say that America is the greatest country in the world.
Mm-hmm.
From the standpoint, it's an open country. It allows you to exceed or excel based upon your work ethics and the way you apply yourself and try to make society a better place because you've lived here. And that's the motto that I've tried to portray all of my life. And I think God has blessed me from the standpoint that he has allowed me to do many, many things that I would not have been able to do otherwise.
And of course, you made yourself open and receptive to, his calling as to what he had assigned to you.
I do.
So.
I've always had an open door. What little knowledge I have, I don't hesitate to share it with anyone. I think that we are better off as a people, as a nation, by sharing our knowledge and not being selfish. We're not going to live forever. And the idea, the concept of making the next generation better than the present or the past generation is a thought that is always on my mind. I like to think that whatever I've done and so forth, it is going to make Indianapolis, the country, much better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, tell me a little bit about the appellate process. In your days of on the bench, when a case would come to you, what would be, what's different than the regular process? When it got in front of you and your the other honorable judges, what was the lay of the land?
Okay, typically, people. I'm going to say this for what it's worth, and I really don't think that we do a very good job of educating the citizens as a whole as to the law, what it means, what it does for them, and the protections that it affords. And my first 20 years or so, or close to 20 years in the practice, I felt that I was better off trying to protect the Constitution and civil rights of litigants. I was offered a job in the prosecutor's office, and I admire good prosecution. But in the same manner, I always felt, maybe it's because of my background coming out of Tennessee, that people's rights needed to be protected. And I devoted my time seriously to making sure that people's rights were protected, that they understood that they had a right to a fair and impartial trial, and no matter what the cost, you had to give that to them. And I know a lot of people get upset because it appears that trials take a long time to conclude, and perhaps sometimes it is unnecessarily long. But in the same manner, when a person's life or liberty is at stake, I don't think that you can quantify it. And I believe that the resources should be made available, whether rich, poor, that a person's rights or liberties should not be taken away from that person without due process of law. So at the trial court level, you have a trial, and a verdict is returned either by judge or jury. A decision is made as to whether or not that person has committed a crime. We're talking about criminal law. There, the prosecutor looks at the case, and he or she reviews it from the standpoint of the evidence that is available, the witnesses who are available, the defendant who's charged, and he makes a decision based upon those factors as to whether or not a crime has been committed. Now, that is called a charge. The information or indictment, whatever, it might be a grand jury indictment where the evidence is taken before a grand jury, which consists of a couple of dozen men and women who listen to the evidence that the prosecutor submits and make a decision as to whether or not the law was violated. On the other hand, the prosecutor can file what is called an information or an affidavit and outlining what he or she perceives to be the law and whether or not it was broken. At that point, a judge looks at it and decides that it should go forward and there should be a trial. Now, when the matter goes to trial and the verdict is returned, whether by jury or by the judge, that person's rights are still protected because for all intent and purposes, that person has been found to be guilty at the lower level, at the trial court level. However, that person still has a right to appeal to a higher court. And that's where we come into play as the appellate court. Now, there are two levels in Indiana. You have the appellate court and you have what is called the Supreme Court. The appellate court is sort of the intermediate court that takes the appeal in most cases directly from the trial court, and it makes a decision as to whether or not the evidence was sufficient to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the person was guilty of the crime charged. Now, that person's rights are still in play because he or she, in most cases, have a right to appeal further to what is called the Supreme Court. Now, that's the Supreme Court of Indiana, not the U.S. Supreme Court. So when the case goes from the appellate court, then it goes to the Supreme Court. I've often teased judges and other lawyers that the Supreme Court treat us as the appellate court as their law clerks. Because I know it's kind of strange, but it seems that we do the work and we go and really boil the facts down and the law as to what had happened in the case and so forth. But the Supreme Court is higher than the appellate court, and it has a policy component to the decision that it makes, because whatever decision the Supreme Court make is going to have an impact on the entire state and sometimes even on the nation, because Indiana cases are cited by other jurisdictions and even the U.S. Supreme Court as valid precedent that should be followed. So it's very important that people understand their rights, understand that the law protects them, understand that the rights and privileges should be afforded to every citizen or every person, regardless of race, religion, money, and so forth. And if a person is indigent and doesn't have funds and means to take an appeal, it is the duty or responsibility of the state, the county, or local jurisdiction to make sure that person has a right to an appeal, regardless of his or her financial status. So that's what we do. We look at the entire record. We go back and review it. As I said before, we research for the Supreme Court,
Yeah.
and we make our decision. And perhaps 85 or 90% of the time, the Supreme Court says that we got it right, and it only accepts about maybe 10% of the cases on transfer. And they oftentimes will agree with us. Sometimes they disagree and reverse what we've done. But in most cases, they agree with us, but they might add some additional language of steps that must be taken in order to make it effective throughout the whole state.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time to explain that so thoroughly, because I think I absolutely agree. No, I don't think. I absolutely agree with you that people are not aware of the process, not aware of their rights, may not even be aware, of what the scenario may look like for them in their own personal standing in a particular situation. So, you laid that out in such a way that they have the information and they can also research and know ahead of time what your rights are. So I'm going to move, and thank you for that. I'm going to move into a position now of the I don't want to see you, meaning we don't want to see you. And I want you to, we're going to play out a quick scenario in which there's a young person, and young can be defined in a lot of different ways, but someone who is on the wrong side of the law, and they're standing before all the processes have been gone through, and there are moments before a judgment that's going to affect the rest of this person's life. Now, if they could go back in time, and I love Stephen Covey, who says, if you could put the end at the beginning and think that through, or maybe a Back to the Future kind of scenario, and that person could look back and make some steps or decisions or some strategies before that moment. What are some things that you maybe have seen, some behaviors and or patterns that you would just want them to be aware of before ever having to cross that threshold?
That's a very good question, Mrs. Sherrod.
Why, thank you.
I know when you first asked me to participate in this podcast and to speak about this subject matter, I hesitated for a moment because I asked myself, what can I do or say that would help in this situation? I know that avoiding getting involved in the criminal justice system is a tremendous concern for parents and young people in general. And I'm assuming that we are speaking mostly to young people, when I mean young, from teenagers up to maybe in their early 20s, because you would assume that once a person reaches their 20s, they are more mature and they think a little bit differently. As a matter of fact, the court system here in Indiana, and I think in just about all states, at the trial court level, there's a two-tier section. That's what is called a juvenile court. And those are cases that are adjudicated by a juvenile court environment, where the judges and the people who work there have expertise in juvenile behavior. And the object there oftentimes is to try to rehabilitate this juvenile before they get into real serious questions. Now, I've spent some time trying cases in the juvenile system, and I did everything I could to try to keep my client there if we could not find the person not guilty. Because the treatment in the juvenile system is altogether different than it is in a criminal court system, even though the objective is often the same, but the treatment is different. In the juvenile system and so forth, we know that these young people are going to be in society for many, many years to come. Say you're 15 to 16 years of age. Well, if you look at the lifespan of an individual in America, it might be 75, 80 years old. So that person is going to be living in society for the next 55 or 60 years. So we concentrate upon trying to rehabilitate this person, to make them see the wrongfulness of their ways so that they be better citizens when they get older and be a contributor to society rather than to take away. Now, in a criminal court setting, when the person is a mature adult, we have some of the same concerns. We want to rehabilitate even adults. But sometimes the law is set up in such a way, the crime is so violent, so vicious, that the society looks for retribution. In other words, punishment. And because in most cases, unless it's something like murder or something, in most cases there have been other opportunities afforded the accused that the person did not take advantage of. And that's why it's important that we start in the juvenile system. We try to get that young person to amend their ways, to make them understand that there is a better road. And I know that we're doing this to a certain extent in honor of Chris Beatty.
Yes.
And we would talk about that a little later, I should say. But there's one thing I want to leave on the minds of anyone that is hearing me, and especially young people. I think the young people must learn and accept the fact that a civilized society will always find a way and a manner to protect itself by enacting rules in form of laws or regulations. And if there's a violation of those rules or regulations, there are consequences. And sometimes those consequences can be very severe, perhaps even grave. Many times young people don't understand that. Now, if you're asking me what I have seen, what I think about our criminal justice system, from the juvenile system on into the criminal court, I am convinced that young people must be taught and learn very early in life to love themselves. Now, it seems a little trite, a little odd. But you see, I think if you learn to love yourself and respect yourself, and that doesn't mean you become a narcissist or self-centered, but it means that you would have empathy for others. And because you can feel the pain and consequence of whatever happens to them could have happened to you. And if I can feel pain, if I love myself, I don't want pain. And if I love myself, I am going to make sure that I do everything within my power to make sure that I don't get hurt. So now, if I don't want to be hurt, why should I transfer that to someone else? They have pain. They have thresholds just like I do. And I think young people need to be able to understand that. And sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
That is profound. That is a perspective. Of course, I know about that, but I had not thought that in terms of your decision making toward others, your actions toward others. Because as you mentioned, Chris Beatty went to the rescue of someone who was being robbed, and just tried to talk with the young men and said, well, there has to be a better way. Unfortunately, those were his last words. He was shot and killed. But if you interject what you just said, and someone took into consideration what their actions, what pain, what injury, what death would have occurred by their hands to someone else, if they thought in those terms, that may have been a completely different outcome.
Yeah. Or would they want it to happen to them?
Exactly.
themselves, what they wanted to happen to their family members.
Wow.
See, and there's another thing that that I think we miss the boat sometimes with our young people.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we don't encourage them enough as to how valuable they are to their families, to the community, to society in general. I think we need to emphasize to young people that they are our future, that we rely upon them, we depend upon them. And I realize that sometimes people say, well, that's putting a lot of pressure on young people. I don't think so. I think that now I don't have necessarily any empirical data these are just my observations.
Right, and that's what we want.
But I feel that young people need responsibilities early in life. I think my experience has been with young people is that they want guidance. They want adults or people that are older than themselves to direct them in the right way to go. At that point, they don't necessarily put it in that vernacular or that language, but they will often say it later on in life if you talk to them. They say, I was glad for my father, my mother, my neighbor who took me aside and say, son or daughter, you did it the wrong way. This is how you should do it. And young people need to develop healthy living patterns and practices. That is, many times they don't want to listen. They think they know everything. I mean, say someone at my age, they probably say, God, man, you're ancient, you know, and all that. But, there is very little in the world that happens today that hasn't happened before.
Absolutely.
It might be in a different form. And so I think we need to have more faith in our young people. I think we need to love them more. We need to encourage them. We need to try to reinforce in their minds that they can become leaders and so forth, that they will be our leaders, whether good, bad, or indifferent.
Absolutely.
They're
Absolutely.
going to. You know what? If you get sick and go to the hospital, who do you think is going to take care of you?
Hello.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, that is so key. Because we don't think, we don't really realize we're far enough removed from them how much pressure some of the young people are under. The day-to-day pressure of school, maybe they have some things going on at home, and, even in their own environment in their neighborhoods, and they're seeking a better way. But that uplifting of them, letting them know that they matter, that they're important, to tee into what is important to you. What are your goals? How can I help lift you up and perhaps mentor you or get you in the right direction for that? Because if people are looking at what's important to them and the people who are important in their lives to help with that.
That's right.
Well, I mean, that's a wonderful combination. It's an essential combination.
It is. It's very much so. One of the things I've always felt that has made this country so great, is the fact that we are a benevolent country. We reach out to help others. And I'm just so concerned if we begin to look upon ourselves. When I say ourselves, I'm talking about this country in general. America first. Wait a minute. I think we can do both. We can walk and chew gum at the same time.
I like that.
I think that we are the greatest country in the world. And, when you look at things from a biblical standpoint, and I hope I'm not offending anyone, but when I think about how the Bible expresses how God was so good to his people, well, I would hate to think how great it was back then in comparison to how great we have it now. God is so good to this country.
Yes.
And I just don't want us to turn inward and stop looking out for our neighbors, i.e., other countries that are in distress and need help.
Absolutely.
Because we can do it. And as long as we are willing to share, I think God will continue to bless this country. And I think with young people, they need guidance from us in selecting their friends and acquaintances.
Absolutely.
They look at things, I think, from the standpoint of instant gratification. When you're 15, 16, 17 years old, it's very difficult for you to see 10 years down the road. And the easiest thing in the world to do is to get in trouble with the law. Now, once you get in trouble with the law, the most difficult thing is to get out of trouble. Now, I realize there are some that have transgressed and have violated the law and have paid that debt to society, so to speak. And they have been welcomed back into the fold. But in the same manner, they lose something in between. Once you get a criminal record, when I was representing juveniles years ago, and I encourage young attorneys even today, try to get that juvenile's record expunged if you can when they reach a certain age. Because that record is going to follow them for the rest of their lives. And with the internet and the cloud and so much out there anymore, nothing hardly stays hidden forever. So if you can get that little record expunged, if that person has been rehabilitated, it gives them a clean slate to build upon.
Absolutely.
But an employer is going to be very, very hard pressed to hire someone who has been in trouble. Now, they're 19, 20, 21, 22 years old, but when they pull that record and find out that person was in trouble with the law, it's going to be very, very difficult to hire that person, especially promote that person to a higher level, more trustworthy job. So that record's going to follow you, and young people don't realize that. They look at the gratification at that moment, not realizing what it's going to be 10, 15, 20 years down the road.
Absolutely.
I had a young man that sent me a letter, and someone I adjudicated years earlier. So I laid it aside for a moment, and then finally I picked it up and read it. And he said, Judge Darden, he said, you don't remember me. He said, but when I was convicted in your court, you decided not to put me in prison. You put me on probation. You told me what I had to do. And he said that I followed everything that you ordered me to do. He said, I want to thank you. He said, I'm happily married today. I got a good job. I think it was a wife and 2 kids, and I owe it all to you. Now, that kind of made my day.
I would say.
We got some good kids out there.
Yes.
Some good kids.
Yes.
And they just need guidance, direction. And, you know, the fact is that bad news, we pick up the paper, we look at the news, and many times we hear a lot of bad things that young people have done. But there's some good things our kids are doing out there, and we don't stress it enough on their behalf.
Right. You are absolutely correct.
And I think it's wrong.
Wow. Oh, but the fact that he took the time to write that letter and to send it to you literally changed the course of his life.
That's right. And this was years later, too. This is not something he just wrote within a few weeks, a few months. This was years later. I'd say 10, 12 years later when he wrote me that letter and expressed how grateful he was that he'd been given another chance,
That
and he had
opportunity.
taken advantage of it.
Oh my goodness! Oh, well, that it made my day hearing it. I didn't have anything to, just but that's those are the things that you're speaking of are so you are so on point with bringing those to the forefront. And it isn't said enough. So I hope it's like that drip, like that you touch the water and then the waves just sort of radiate out, that one little drop in the water from that relationship between you and that young person changed the course. So I had a real time question from a young parent to speak to T into what you were saying, and the parent asked, "What do I do to keep my child out of the criminal justice system?" This parent wants to take an active role in being a participant because parents, you can make or break your life, the life of your child. So, what are some things that you can address in terms of actions and responsibilities from parents?
Definitely. And that's what I was hoping I would be speaking to both the child and the parents.
Yes.
Ann Landers, I'm dating myself. Ann Landers was an old script writer, used to have an advice column in the newspapers.
Yes.
She wrote an article years ago, and I'm sure she copied it from someone else who had written it before her. But in the article, she indicated that parents have to stop blaming themselves. That you can count the number of parents on one hand that goes out and knowingly advise their children to do something wrong. But the problem we have right now is that peer pressure is so great on kids. And this is what I meant when I said that as a whole, we are gregarious in nature as human beings. We want to belong. We want acceptance. So as a result, sometimes we get it in the wrong places. And this is where parents have got to come involved. They've got to recognize very, very early that children are very vulnerable at a young age because who they hang around with is extremely important. Now you can and the term gang carries a very, very dark connotation when in fact you can have a good gang. But you can have a bad game. But the fact is, a child wants to be accepted, not only in his family, but in his neighborhood, in the community in whom he or she associates with or run around with. So I think you have to be inquisitive. You have to talk to your child. Find out who their friends are. Find out what their aspirations are. Find out what their goals are. What do they want? Also, inquire as to who their friends are. Invite their friends. If those friends won't come to your home and sit down and talk with you along with your child, you got a problem. See, and sometimes those kids can be turned around by you and your child by the right guidance. Sometimes they just happen to be in a situation where maybe they're parentless or their parents don't take an interest in what they're doing. So you have to help your child to develop healthy living patterns and respect for others. You have to help your child to become, and you have to become a good listener. You have to display patience with your child. You have to also learn to engage perhaps in some of the things that he or she like to do. It's not easy necessarily, but in the same manner, they're going to be gone before you know it. That span from the time they're off your lap, by the time 5 or 6 years old, to the time they go off to college or military or become adults, it's only about a 15-year span there. And more chances are they're not likely ever to come back home. So whatever you have managed to instill in them for those 15 or 20 years, it's going to follow them to the rest of their lives. And then that's not to say that they're not going to transgress.
Right. I mean,
That's not to
we're all
say they're
human.
not going to make a mistake.
Right.
But the foundation is there. And I think trying to find out and keep what makes them active, what do they like to do? And then on top of that, you find things to engage them in. Put them in, say, the boys' club, girls' club. Put them in the Boy Scouts. Get them involved in sports and activities, things like that, you know. It's unfortunate that kids need a lot today. There's a lot of bling out there that's attractive. And somehow or another, you've got to be able to get them past that, that the bling is not going to be there always. And if you want the bling, you have to work hard to get it,
Exactly.
honestly. Honest work has never hurt anyone. And the fact remains, if you have responsibilities, reward your kids for actually accomplishing those goals or doing the things that he or she should do. And I think the worst thing in the world to do for a lot of parents is not let their kids have any responsibility. The mother, father picks up behind them. They, making the beds, mowing the lawn. They need responsibilities, and I think in the long run they appreciate it
Sure. Builds character.
because it shows that you care too.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to tell you something else, Mrs. Gerard, is
please,
very
yes.
important. For what it's worth, I think having a religious component in your life is important.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
Because I think if you have a religious component in your life, it helps to develop good character, and it helps the child to learn enduring moral values. In other words, what's right, what's wrong, respect for others. Now, if a child isn't taught that, how can he learn? He can't learn about osmosis. He just doesn't learn. It just drops out of the sky, and suddenly he realizes these things. It's there because someone has taught him or her. Someone taught you.
Absolutely. Those mentors, those cheerleaders in our lives, as I often refer to them, they are quintessential. You didn't teach yourself your ABCs. You didn't teach yourself to walk or
That's right.
feed yourself. Those are having a faith-based decision-making process is essential to how you're going to lean when the time comes to step forward or to step back.
And if parents don't see that, I guarantee you, when you look at, I don't want to comment upon pending cases,
Right.
but let's take the Chris Beatty situation. Remember what I said earlier when I said a society will always find a way to protect itself, and you have consequences and so forth for those who violate the law, for those who are convicted,
Yes.
and sometimes they're severe or grave. Now let's do a little follow-up on Chris Beatty. The ones that were accused of murdering Chris Bailey have been convicted. Are you aware of the sentences that they received?
No. No.
Now
I'm
these
not.
are young people
Yes.
in their early 20s and so forth. One person person number one received a sentence of 164 years in prison. Person number two received a sentence of 164 years in prison. Person number three received a sentence of 108 years in prison. So now you ask yourself, what, I don't understand. What were they thinking? What were they thinking?
Their life is gone. I mean,
Their life is gone.
if they were to reincarnation come back, you're still gonna, have most of your subsequent life gone as well.
Gone. And this is why I'm saying we've got to get to our young people early and prevent them from thinking outside of the box, so to speak. You want these religious components as part of their lives.
Wow. So 300 some years, and 3 lives gone.
Yeah.
In a moment, probably in a moment. So that, man, well, thank you for that, because I knew it was long, but I didn't realize it was,
And see, I don't know what Chris Beatty said exactly, but I'm sure that this was probably in the back of his mind. Guys, there has to be a better way. You can't go around taking people's property, and especially by violence or force.
Exactly.
Look what it's cost them. Even if they had taken everything that Chris Beatty or anyone else had,
right,
it cannot in any way measure up to 164 years in prison.
Before you could think about seeing the light of day.
When I was the chief deputy and the public defender for the state of Indiana, I dare say that I have visited just about every prison in this state. And it always broke your heart, especially when you're dealing with very young people, to know that they were there for 30, 40, 50, 60 years because they ran around with gangs. Or number two, they disrespected other people's property. And they did things to violate the law. As I said before, I keep going back to the fact the law will always find a way to protect itself. If it means resorting to draconian methods. Because there are situations where you've taken a person's life or liberty. What else can you do?
Wow. That is such sage advice. And we, as you said, Ann Landers, yes, I'm very familiar. So if you're dating yourself, so am I.
Well,
but you get wise through years. You get wise. Wisdom you're not born with it. It's something that trial and error, life will take you through a certain course, and you gain knowledge and wisdom through time.
That's right. We don't have a throwaway society. Our society tries to rehab people, and every member of our society is important. And I think we just have to, if it's a burden, it's a burden.
Yeah.
But I just think we just have to let our young people know that you are important.
That's exactly the day you were born.
Important.
The day you were born,
That's
you
right.
became important.
You are our future. You are our future leaders and so forth.
I
We depend
appreciate
on
that. I appreciate that so much. That is being said, and I go into younger audiences as Telda, because she tells the story, and that same message is just carried from the time that they're very small to just love themselves.
That's right.
You can't start that soon enough.
Yeah.
My mother has an expression, and we'll conclude on this. She says, "If you don't know where you're going, how will you know when you get there?"
That's it.
And I hope she won't mind me saying she just celebrated her 90th birthday.
Oh,
so
wonderful,
I might get a church pinch for that one. You know, how Mama kind of gets you up under the arm and gives you a squeeze. So, but it's so true. It's like that roadmap. So everything that you've said, everything that you have brought to the table and to the forefront. Discovering what's important to you, loving yourself, taking the steps to not sabotage that, your person goals, your outlook, the things that are important to you, and to add meaning to your life every single day and find the people who are going to add meaning. A bad company corrupts good character.
That's right.
So putting all that under one umbrella and spending the time with our young people to let them know that. And I love you had a quote here. You said, if you can't be a lawyer, be an advocate.
That's right.
So most of us can do that at no charge, no cost whatsoever.
It is very important. Now, I love our kids, and I really, really dislike the fact that we don't compliment them enough.
You are absolutely right.
There's some awful good kids out there.
Yes.
And they just don't get the headlines and the publicity. That old expression, bad news travels fast.
Absolutely.
And,
well, I put it out there to our audience. If you are listening, and I certainly hope that you are, I challenge you to find a young person in your life and go out of your way. That may be a phone call, but in person is best. If you text or the social media, there's nothing wrong with that. But there's just such a higher level of gratification, that person to person, and let them know how much they're appreciated. Let them know how much you are proud of them. Even when they make mistakes, they fall down. We all do. But express those things to them face to face. So that's my challenge, is to get with the minimum of one, maximum, no maximum. You can go 100 or more. And young people receive that, because Judge Darden is absolutely correct. We don't tell you nearly enough that we love you, we're proud of you, and that we are in your corner. So we'll end on that note. And Judge Darden, I certainly feel that we know you better. We are better people for having known you and what you stand for. So I'm asking to put on your turn signal so that others know clearly where you're going and make that turn in the right direction. So I always end by saying, I urge you to merge onto a better way road. And Judge Darden, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. Until next time.